been approached? I know you mentioned earlier you talked primarily FCS, FBS programs. Have you ever been approached by a Division II program or NAIA, anything like that, for services or anything?
Not yet. We haven't. Now we've had coaches from the NAIA and Division II contact us and want to know where they were ranked in our database and if we could help market them and we FCS is the lowest level that we're able to grade position coaches and grade coordinators and coaches. So at this time, we would just tell them, hey, we don't have any data for you until you hit the FCS level. At that point in time, we can start evaluating you. And if you hit that our threshold of the top 60%, then we'd be glad to market you. But anything below that, then it's getting into the weeds a little much.
So to give it like an example, like Coach Ryan Held, who was with Nebraska for a number of years, and he's in your database because he was at UCF, he was at Nebraska. Last year he was at North Alabama, so that would be FCS, I believe. So he still would be in it, but now he's the head coach at UNK. So for as long as he's going to be there, there would just be a gap, so to speak, in your database until if he came back into FBS at some point, there'd just be a however many year gap while he's at Division II.
Exactly. Yep. Okay. Exactly.
And then with Nebraska coaches like Terrence Knighton or Garrett McGuire, you just don't have any. Their data's zero right now.
Yep, it's zero. They're a blank slate. Yep, those guys. Those guys are coming in with no FBS or FCS experience. They're blank slates. We don't have an opinion on them either way.
Well, we'll see.
Is what Nebraska staff has right now? Is this unique in the number? At an FBS level, is it unique that we have a number of guys that don't have any data? Knighton, McGuire, Bob Wager, has been a long time, very successful high school coach in Texas, but there just isn't any data with them. Is that unique that Nebraska has, a decent chunk of our staff that way, or do you see this a lot of times, or are there a lot of staffs that have 3-4 guys that don't have any data on them?
Well, Nebraska. I think when we ran the numbers, I think they're the 16th most inexperienced. I don't want to say inexperienced. It's not what I'm trying to say. Mm-hmm. They're the staff with the least amount of FBS, FCS experience in the country. 16th. I think they're ranked 16th, the most inexperienced. If that's the correct word. That's not the correct word. They're a young staff. There's a lot of elements we really, really like about it. Coach Rhule, how I talked about, we don't track their development of players, but we do track the head coach's ability to hire assistants and what those assistants go on to do later. Coach Rhule has an impeccable track record of finding guys like this, and they turn out to be excellent assistants. You look at like Elijah Robinson down in Texas A&M, excellent defensive line coach. He started with Coach Rhule. You have Fran Brown at Georgia, who started out with Coach Rhule, who's an excellent defensive backs coach. There's numerous guys like that who was able to go. And
Joey McGuire, right?
Yeah, exactly, at Texas Tech. He's able to pluck out of seemingly thin air who are really good guys. So, Coach Rhule, he has that covered as far as finding young guys who are hungry and who are able to live up to the standard he needs them to. There's a few young guys on the staff that we do have grades for. We love Barthel. We love Cooper. Those are both young coaches who we love their arc in their career so far. They have the potential to be superstars. Coach White is the same way. He's young and he's early on in his career. We love his arc. Ed Foley is a great special teams coach. So he's done. Although the staff is extremely young, there are elements of it that we really do like as far as what we're able to rate.
And I know we're happy with having 2 coordinators that are coming from P5 schools as coordinators. I mean, that's something for us. I think that we're really pleased with the level and the experience of the coordinators that we have coming in. You mentioned 16th most inexperienced. Is that at the P5 level, or is that at all of FBS? How it's the 16th out of what? 16th most inexperienced out of how many?
FBS, all 130.
All 130 FBS. Okay.
They average 2.7 years of FBS, FCS experience per on-field coach.
Okay. Do you do anything with strength and conditioning coaches? Any kind of rankings there, or is that? not applicable?
No, we really haven't found a. I mean, we've tested that for the past 2 to 3 years, trying to find a reliable way to kind of measure what's going on there and who is responsible for what. And there just really isn't a good way to do that right now that we feel comfortable in actually using for schools to hire those guys. Usually those guys are guys the head coach has to have a pretty intimate relationship with, because they have the team the majority of the time. So the coach has to trust that guy with his team for the majority of the year. That's not somebody that we feel at this point we have the type of data we can go in and say definitively this guy's better than that guy. And we won't do that until we've tested it and we're confident of that.
You know, one of the coaches the only coach that has been retained from last year was Donovan Raiola at offensive line. And that led to some, early questions from Husker fans that were concerned about the O-line a year ago. Now, when Coach Rhule was asked about it, his response was that he teaches the scheme exactly the way that I want, that there's he was specific down to there are 3 different styles of blocking schemes, and he coaches the style that I like. Now let's get into the weeds there of coaching X's and O's there. When you guys are breaking down something like an offensive line coach for somebody, did you break it down at that level that there are, whether it's 3 different styles, or some people think there's 2, or some people think there's 4, but however many different styles there are, let's just say zone and gap blocking schemes. I mean, you break it down to that level where it's like, look, you're looking for zone. We're going to pull from these 10 coaches and we're going to exclude these 10 that aren't zone guys. Or how do you do it with that? And I'm using O-line as the example, but you could use defensive back coaches who are zone versus man or whatever. I mean, there's other examples.
I'd like to have like a really cool, flashy answer for you here and say, yeah, we do this and this and this, and we watch so much film. But honestly, we don't watch any film. We're not football. We're not X's and O's guys. We're nerds with a spreadsheet. and we have the numbers when we say, okay, this guy's numbers over his career say he is really good. He can coach offensive line. I don't know what scheme he runs. I know his coaching history. I know he's an air raid guy typically. So those guys, we will try to match with air raid offensive coordinators. Okay. Just an overarching philosophy. All right. You're not going to go in and you're not going to take, let's say a Stanford's offensive line coach to go and be Phil Longo's offensive line coach, right? Because Phil Longo, he's more air raid. He's not the same type of. He's not going to want to line up and mash people the way the old Stanford teams did, right? That's not going to be a match. So we will look at lineage a little bit and say, okay, this guy's lineage kind of matches up. But as far as X's and O's, we stay out of all that. We let the coaches kind of. That's when we give them the list, and they say, okay, these guys are good. Those guys don't fit what I'm trying to do here. And that's cool, And typically the way it is with the position coaches, we'll get a list of about 3 or 4 guys that the head coach really likes, and we will evaluate them for them, and then add 2 or 3 guys we think would be good fits from the criteria that the list they've already given us kind of match.
Put your Husker fan hat on for a second. Do you have the fullback's coming back? Are you a run the damn ball guy? As a fan, forget you're not supporting any other schools right now. You're a Husker fan. What do you want to see on the field?
Absolutely, man. Let's get the fullback back. Let's see some ISO. Let's see some. Yeah, I mean, I grew up the same time frame you guys did. I remember seeing, the games were close in the first, second quarter, and then by the third quarter, those holes you could drive a truck through them because we just had pounded people into submission. That's what I want to see. That's what I want to get back to. I want to see good defense. I want to see a good, grinding out ground game with some play action pass off of it. That's the kind of football that I want to see. That's what I'm partial to.
I got one more question, Honky, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I'm done. You go with yours.
Just this one, and maybe it'll help Adam. The little self-promotion, I guess, because we know like most FBS coaches obviously listen to the Redcast, so it's a big opportunity. But you talked a little bit about your the start, right? The genesis story of Matrix Analytical. I was just trying to put it in my head. I think it says 9 years ago you guys started this with Dave Bartu, and then you've been doing this for 6 years, maybe like publicly, and you have this gigantic database you had to collect. Could you talk a little bit about like how you started to as you establish that database, start to run numbers to try to be predictive on is this guy going to be a good fit? Or I mean, like how did you start to like work on figuring out how your formula was going to help, whether it's a coaching hire or a player development or anything, that type of thing? How did you work through that? That's a really, I mean, you don't have to get too nerdy on that, but I think it's pretty intriguing that you're able to like work out the system. So you felt that confident that you could start like promoting it.
Well, yeah, like I said, we developed the system 9 years ago, right? And then we tracked it for 3 years, and we watched it for 3 years. We said, okay, according to the way we're doing things here, this coaching staff should pop. And when it did pop, that's, we're like, okay, that worked. Or, the more conversations with coaches that we had, we said, hey, we think this guy, and this guy, and this guy is good. What do you think? Are we on the right track? And they would say, yeah, those guys are legit. You guys are on the right track. So the first 3 years was a lot of testing, just a lot of observation, a lot of, okay, what went wrong here if it didn't work? What can we improve? And how accurate do we need this thing to be before we actually put it out there? Nothing is going to be 100% predictive. That's not, but we kind of go with the 85-15 rule, where if we're right 85% of the time, that's good for us. We're not going to be right every time. It's just not going to happen. So once we got to that point where we were comfortable, where we're 80-85% of the time we were going to be correct, then that's when we started to go into coaches and saying, hey, we can help you with this. Give us a shot. And we had one athletic director 6 or 7 years ago that said, hey, you guys are different. You talk different. I want to bring you in and help me out with my head coach's defensive coordinator hire.
Yeah.
He wants this guy. What do you guys think? And we were honest. We said, do not hire that guy, because he's not. He's going to be terrible. And the guy didn't listen to us. He went ahead and hired the guy anyway, and he fired him the very next year because he was horrible. And their athletic director said, hey, they said this was going to happen exactly the way it happened, for the reasons they said it was going to happen. Let's go back to them, and we're going to listen to them this time. And we did, and we nailed their next hire for them. And then that athletic director started talking to other athletic directors. And that's kind of how it spread. So
it's pretty cool. It's pretty cool. Has there ever been like an outlier where you're like, man, this should totally work, and it just like totally didn't work, and you have no explanation?
There's been a couple of those. Yeah. A few years back, and that's kind of where we learned the whole, too many Chiefs on the same staff is not good. Too many on the same staff is not good. There was a and we've kind of cautioned recently. We've kind of cautioned some schools against that, and some have listened to us, some haven't. But a few years back, we absolutely stacked a coaching staff with guys that were just, they were just phenomenal position coaches and coordinators, but they got along like oil and water. It was a terrible environment for that coaching staff for that year. There was arguments consistently about philosophy and the way things were, and it didn't go well. And we learned a good lesson there that, hey, there's got to be some, synergy here between, these coordinators and these position coaches and these head coaches. Otherwise, you get too many guys who have the same ambition to be a head coach too quickly, and you can't have 8 head coaches on a football staff. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. So you got to have a hierarchy there. Just, like I said, I mentioned Damon Benning's saying earlier, and that's exactly right, that we've kind of found to be true. So,
Hey, I do have one question that came about as you were just talking here. You were mentioning like sometimes things can be like an outlier. We've had one just strange outlier for the last 5 years, but under the Frost era was all these close losses, the 1-score losses, the most by a far amount from the number 2 team over the course of that time period. Is there a certain analytic or analytics and multiple ones that can help explain why we lost so many close games, and maybe are the things that we would try to focus on to, next year not lose those same games by the one score, but to actually flip it and win it by a score. Is there anything that you can come out of looking at the scores, the games, the analytics, anything that you can kind of take out of it to say that, yeah, these are our 1 or 2 or 3 big problem areas over that time period?
Well, I think the low-hanging fruit people would want me to say is culture wasn't there, that magic word, but I don't necessarily that. I mean, that's hard to put your finger on. I mean, what is a good culture? What is culture? What culture? There's totally different philosophies across the country on culture and all are successful. I mean, there are multiple different philosophies on culture are successful. So a lot of that was it was just circumstances, bad luck. That many close losses in a row. Yeah. That there is a reason for that, but there's not a reason that I can point to with analytics and say that's the culprit. That's why this happened this way. That's why, as a fan base, we suffered through 5 years of this. And believe me, if there was a way to find it, I would have tried to find it and would have found it. And would have been yelling at the top of my lungs by now from every social media outlet I could find. But there's really not. And for me to come on and say that there is and that we'd found one, it would just be, misleading. So
yep. I'm not a question.
I just curious, if you did have a coach that had that kind of history, is that something you would note in your analytics that we can't explain why, but this guy loses close games or something to that effect?
There is, yeah, we do keep track of that, and some of that is is regression. I mean, for the talent profile that Nebraska has had for the past 5 years, they should have been a much better team. But when you compare this talent profile to other teams with a similar talent profile, relative to who they play, they underperformed vastly. It wasn't near the mark that the expected win totals just were not there. And I'm not pointing any fingers about whose fault it was or whatever. That's water on the bridge. But the fact remains that it was they horribly underperformed.
Well, and that's true. I mean, last summer when we had you guys on, the win projection for last year was going to be 7, and it was like 7.9 really, and then you even contacted me like a week later, and you're like, nope, we switched something with the Purdue game. We're gonna win 8, and it was like, yay!
Yeah, exactly. That's a perfect example. Is and for that win for the talent profile and for the returning production profile that they had, that's what they should have won. And it didn't happen, and they got fired because of it. I mean,
and you think about that they finished 4-8, and yet when you had a double-digit lead in the third quarter against Northwestern, double-digit lead in the fourth quarter against Wisconsin, a double-digit lead at halftime against Minnesota. Who's predicting a loss to Georgia Southern? And you go down the list and you go, without really even being that much better. And this gets back to that first question I had about I don't know if you can put an analytic around it, but how did we lose so many stinking close games? I mean, just those 4 games I just mentioned right there are ones where it's like, well, there's your 8-4. If you don't collapse, in some of those games, it's bizarre. And I don't have an analytic for it either. I have a lot of words for it, but we're a PG show. So
yeah.